You're listening to Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. The music you are currently hearing is the opening to Ghost, playing at the Piccadilly Theatre in London, and the music prior to that was the opening of the, some would say, lamented Love Never Dies. Both these productions received rave reviews for their use of projections and digital animation. I was lucky enough to be able to sit down with a chap that designed the projections for both these shows and many, many more, Jon Driscoll.
This is Alan Menken, and you are listening to Musical Talk.
As we've mentioned before on the podcast, there is sort of one team of theatrical talent or geniuses working in the West End at the moment. They come under the guise of director Matthew Waters, set designer Rob Howell, lighting designer Hugh Vanstone, illusion designer Paul Keeve, and in some cases, projection designer Jon Driscoll, with whom I'm speaking to at the moment. Hello, Jon Driscoll. Hello.
Good afternoon, Nick.
How are you?
Very well, thanks. Slightly embarrassed that you were that introduction. There's a group of fellow projection designers coming through the ranks at the moment, and we're all getting to a point where we're finally being able to do the shows that we kind of had in our heads, and Ghost probably is a really good example of one of those shows where the technology has come to fruition, where we can actually express ourselves with the screen technology to the audience.
You're a cinematographer, you're a lighting designer, and you're a projection and animation designer.
I sort of, not completely accidentally, but I did start my training as a lighting designer, and absolutely loved being a lighting designer. Worked with some really fantastic people like namely Mark Jonathan, Paul Pyan. I was served as an assistant to lots and lots of people, really. And then I eventually ended up working at the National Theatre and served in all three theatres as a lighting technician. But got to a point where I really wanted to fulfil which was my sort of childhood ambition, which was to become a lighting cameraman or cinematographer. And so one day, while working the follow spot on a show in 1999, I decided to write an application to the National Film School, and luckily I was invited to go for an interview. Cut a long story short, I ended up studying the MA course cinematography there. The rest is history, really. I graduated from there in 2002 and came quite quickly back to theatre to apply those new skills.
Did you ever think that the worlds of film and theatre would eventually collide? I mean, because it's been quite not slow, but it's now more prevalent than it's ever been in the past.
Let's not pretend. I mean, it's been happening for decades. I mean, it's been happening since Magic Lanterns. You know, the end of, the 19th century, 18th century, I mean, it's been going on forever. But I had an inkling, I remembered Time, for example. That was a great example, but that was actually film projection. But I had an inkling about it when we were at the National Theatre in about 97, because there was an interest in it. And there were quite a number of productions even back then, which used VHS and all sorts of analogue formats, which often I had to deal with. And the ambition was already there with the designers, because we always used to do scenic projection, which was big, huge slide projectors and party projection. You know, the Hair trilogy, at the time, I remember had beautiful scenic projections in the Olivier, and so I kind of had an idea, but it wasn't really my plan to go and learn to be a cameraman and to come back towards theatre. It's just, when I graduated, it was a real time of upheaval for the film industry. It was the time when film cameramen were really beginning to be... The whole thing was changing, the landscape was changing. Digital technology had come in. There were no longer really documentary teams going out as a film as a film cameraman and a director. Suddenly it all became one person operations, and also, we were suddenly editing things in our houses, in our
Thank you,
homes.
Steve Jobs, your legacy.
Exactly. So on the one hand, it was incredibly liberating for artists and people like myself, but at the same time I was also kind of doing myself out of a job. So then there was suddenly, a lot of people, a lot of contacts I knew in the theatre kind of inquired, could you film something for us? Could you try and make this script work, which has got a filmed content or whatever? And one of the first things we did was, funny enough, Our House, which had a lot of 16mm film in it, believe it or not. So, and that was...
Which I liked. We were talking about Our House earlier, and I've only ironically seen the filmed version, which the BBC did for Christmas one year, I think it was. And a very clever example of a jukebox musical. You'd almost think the songs were written for the show. And Tim Firth did such a good job with the storyline. And Rob Howell, the designer in this circle of genii, which I shall call it, did an amazing design job, very much enhanced by some extreme moments of filmed, when they're in the car and things, and you have Chitty Bang Bang fly by. And
back in those days, everything was quite a stretch to realise. And when we were approached, I think it was Rob. I knew Rob, and I think Rob introduced us to the team, and it was all pretty Heath Robinson, if I'm quite honest with you. I mean, not that it's developed a terrible amount since then, but we were talking about... It was actually... I worked with a really dear friend, Richard Overall, who was a film editor from the National Film School the same time as I. And we literally just decided we were going to do this job. It was one of our first things out of film school. We had to do things like... I remember borrowing a 60mm film camera, recruiting a friend of Richard's who had a microlight, strapping ourselves into this microlight, flying around Essex, shooting, point
People
of view.
Essex?
No, point of view filming of the car sequence, driving in my car, nearly losing the lens at probably a couple of 1,000 feet above Essex from the camera, which was terrible. And we were just ambitious, and we just decided we'd do anything to make these designs happen. Back at that time, trying to get an image onto a stage of any sort of quality or brightness was a major effort.
Was this before the Woman in White?
Yeah, it was. It was exactly the same time as We Will Rock You.
Oh, okay.
Now, We Will Rock You had. We were quite envious of their technology. They were a step ahead of us. To give you an idea, we had projectors to do Our House, and I think they produced something like 2,500 lumens of brightness, which is about the equivalent of what your home projector would do nowadays. And they were the size of a mini, I'd say, and they were strapped underneath the balcony of the Cambridge, and everything was a huge, huge undertaking. Somehow we managed to get that musical together, and it's still we still get the odd request from people wanting to put those films on in their productions around the country, amateur productions.
Deny it.
And yes, it was quite a big turning point for us.
And for those who are interested, Our House is available from Dress Circle, so we're not sponsored by them. So, but do go and pick it up, because it is. I'm much more fascinated by it now, because I realise how groundbreaking the show is. Let's zip forward to your life now, where you have Ghost on, but you have The Wizard of Oz on, you have had Love Never Dies on, but recently, and as in recently, within the last couple of days at the time of recording, what have you just wrapped up?
Just recovering from, might I add, the Phantom of the Opera, the 25th anniversary celebration.
Minor celebration at some
the
little place in
Albert Hall.
Kensington.
Yeah.
The Royal Albert Hall. Now that's a very interesting space to work in, isn't it?
Very challenging, yeah, but thoroughly enjoyable. And it's just not conventional in any way. If I was a sound designer, I'd be talking about how difficult it is to get the sound right. But it's not such a hard task to get projections in that space, because it's done all the time. But it's the scale of them. They are. We're talking about 20-metre wide screens, that kind of size.
It's cinema, isn't it?
It is. It's big, and that I guess the other big challenge is getting a show on like that in such a short time frame.
Well, the short rehearsal period as well. Probably,
yeah,
regards.
And the fit-up of what we call the fit-up, which is the time you get it all built and get it all programmed so it works as a show. You know, it was probably 2 or 3 days with a lot of prep beforehand, so that we didn't go to the venue and not have it ready to go. So,
John has slept, by the way, in case you're wondering.
Yeah,
there's a bed on the floor here in his studio, and he has.
Or actually, the studio has become the new place for me to hide, which is in this time after the event. So,
obviously, Phantom has it's ingrained in people's mind as to how it should look. Were you influenced by the original designs at all?
Well, very much so, because the brief was to. Firstly, I should say that our brief was to work on the amazing designs of the late Maria Bjornsson, who designed the original, and our brief was to evoke, we basically use those designs and to evoke the original atmosphere of the show at Her Majesty's, and to transpose it into the Royal Albert Hall, and we did that. We collaborated with Matt Kinley, who's a fantastic designer to work with, who I knew from the National Theatre again. So that was a great, reunion. And we just really wanted to take those designs by using, we actually photographed them and filmed the original designs, and we reformatted them for it's really a staged performance, not a concert. And
there were costumes and things.
Everything was staged, really. The problem was, of course, if you're in the Albert Hall, you don't have a fly tower and you don't have all of that space for all that scenery. So we were really taking the scenery, animating it in such a way that it felt like you were in the original production.
And also, the thing with the Royal Albert Hall is more people are up than they are down, aren't they, as regards the audience? So you want to have things be at an angle. We're looking at photographs earlier, which is fascinating, and most of it appears to be the top third of the stage, or the proscenium arch.
That's right. It was split into 2/3, and working in thirds is a great way to go for anything that's photographic or anything.
The more the first.
Exactly. So, there was basically an LED screen, which is probably explained later. But there was a bright screen at the bottom, lower res screen, and then there was a projected screen, which kind of represented all those beautiful backdrops that they have, in the Her Majesty's version.
And a DVD of this production will be available, yes?
I think it comes out in November.
It was done very successfully at all the cinemas around the country, or the world, was it? It was in the States?
I think it's staggered, but it went out to a lot of places on the Sunday night.
Did that feel bizarre for you, knowing that your work was now being seen around?
All I can tell you is that it added a whole new layer of stress, because there were moments when we had technological problems. We always have a lot of blips with the technology we use, because basically we're designing prototypes all the time, and we managed to get through the show pretty smoothly, but I can tell you that I wouldn't like to feel that way every day of the week, but it was satisfying when we got to the end.
Okay, does it for you to know that 2 shows of yours are going up in little more than 4 hours tonight in the West End?
I've got used to that feeling. Yeah, it's the difference is that when we've got a show that's sustaining a run, we've had all that tech time. We've had quite often 6 weeks of previews or 4 weeks of previews to iron out all the problems that we have, and then that's that. It's funny. We quite often do a really, really great first show, but then 2 days in, something will present itself. Maybe something will start to overheat or something, and our job is to work in the previews is to riddle out all of these problems, and as well as the look of the show, the fun bit, the creative bit, there's also that technological side that we just have to iron out the problems with. So
and safety, of course, for everyone involved.
Safety, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Ghost. I reviewed Ghost. You heard my review. You know my thoughts.
I do.
All praise to you and the creative team and the technical team involved. But tell the listeners how mammoth Ghost has been for you. Say what you're allowed to say.
Quite a commitment. I mean, we started it probably the first filming we did for it was back in November last year. So coming up to a year ago. And then we, you could say that we were on site for probably 6 months.
In Manchester? Or
I think it was 3 months in Manchester, and probably the same again in London.
Now, for those of you who haven't seen Ghost, first of all, go and see it, because it's worth seeing. And second of all, this is... it's not a new form of technology for projections or screens, but it's something new for the stage, isn't it?
Well, no, it is and it isn't. I think what you're talking about is you're talking about the screen technology we use, which, if I could describe it to you, it's like, if you can imagine little, I suppose they look... they're like little crystals. They're like little... What they actually are is LEDs, which most people know what they are now.
Light-emitting diodes.
That's right, and they are very, very small. It's a little capsule with a little red, a little green and a little blue LED in, and depending on how bright each one of those is, that renders the picture. But basically that's spread over a very large surface area.
It's like pop art, but in moving picture form.
It is a bit. I mean, the easiest way, it's like a lot of the signs you see in Piccadilly Circus. It's that sort of technology. So it's very vibrant imagery.
There's one for Ghost, which...
There is, helps you find the theatre. But it's that kind of technology. So it's very vivid.
Or Times Square or anything.
Exactly. Times Square is an even better example because there's acres of it there. But all these screens, depending on when they were designed and manufactured, they all look better. I mean, as time has gone on, they look better and better and brighter, or more subtle in their colour rendition. And we've got a special one in Ghost, which is called a stealth screen, which basically means it's semi-transparent. So you can...
It sell to the story very well.
It does, and you can, the director can put a scene behind it, and a bit like a gauze, you can see through it. To a varying degree, depending on how brightly lit it is, you can have a scene out behind it, or put imagery in front of it and contain the people behind it in that imagery.
You can have three things going on at the same time.
You can.
Now, do you think this means that one day, if Ghost continues to be a huge success, will it become dated?
Well, it's a lot to do with the content on those screens as well, which is what we do. We design mostly the footage that goes in the shows. But yeah, of course it could become dated. And everything I've ever looked at or done, unless it's a period piece, like Brief Encounter or something like that, it may start to look dated, I don't know. But then Ghost, I'm not sure. It's very much of a Wall Street thing.
Like Enron.
Very like Enron. It's all about values, stock values. A lot of it. It's and it's stylised in the way we've done it, and we've kind of wanted it to look a little bit, of a time of a Wall Street, that boom time. So I don't know. I think parts of it might, but
But do you think once screen technology gets more advanced, do you think that element of it will become dated?
I don't think in the next 10 years maybe, because it's stood well up to now. The screen we use in in Ghost is probably 5 years old. You've got to remember that this stuff comes out of the rock and roll industry. It's motivated by amazing bands like U2. In fact, U2 had a lot to do with the design of that their concerts facilitated that screen, and it's also trade shows. So it's those very, very high profile, high budget presentations that spurn on this technology, and we're at the receiving end later down the food chain, and by which time it's still new to theatre, but it's been around for a while. So it's tremendously exciting for Ghost, because that production was bold enough to take it on, to embrace it, and just go for it.
How does in any musical that you're involved with, how does the timing of the images on the screen work so well with the music? Which comes first, the music or the film?
The music, but the reason is because we know we've got. It's great stuff to work with, great rhythm, great. For an editor, it's a gift, because you can cut very, very nicely to to the timeline of the song. So what we're trying really hard to do with Ghost is make it work really well in sync with the music, and it's because we've syncopated the way the video plays back with the band, and that's done. I won't bore you with it, but
Oh, please do. That's why we're here.
MIDI and all that kind of thing is a way that we can link our cues to the band, and then when the band gets to a certain point in the music, the video is triggered. It's not somebody necessarily poised with their button above, their finger above the button about to press that cue. It's all actually tied into the sound.
So is someone in the orchestra pit pressing the button to control the screens, or is that done by ASM or DSM? Or
it's a combination. It depends on what we think would be best. But there's a song called Now. I think this is the Life. The very long sequence.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. In fact, most of the musical numbers in Ghost are triggered by the band, and so we know that at a certain point the video is going to start and it's going to stay in time, but it's broken up into lots of sections so we can keep it in time in check.
So if the conductor wants to take a certain song slower that night, he can't.
No, he can. The conductor on Ghost, there were lots of vamp bars. This was always a bit of an issue for us because I can tell you understand what that means, but it basically means
a bar that's repeated over dialogue till then.
Yeah, exactly. So what we'll do is we'll also have a vamp of video, so we'll have extra video that allows that undetermined or that to be determined section of the music to carry on going, and then as soon as it carries on going, the video joins it again, and so it's the video that is the underscoring video in Ghost is in short sections which are roughly the same size as the score, and it jumps in and out of that kind of stuff all the way along. But our brief and what we wanted to achieve was really, really tight visuals to the sound.
I've labelled Ghost as a true 21st century musical because moments it's like rock concert meets MTV, because there are almost moments where it feels like you're inside a music video because everything is so in sync and is slow, like Matrix style movement, which I like to call it, and things like that, or people's slow motion. And,
well, it's further complicated by the fact that they want it. I mean, what we tried to achieve was having the ensemble who are on stage also on the screens. Yeah. So very early on, we would be shooting the ensemble in green screen studios. But we've got to be shooting in order for it to be in sync with the music and the real live action on stage. We've got a soundtrack played back in that studio, which is perfectly in time with what's going to be played back in the theatre. So there's lots of different levels of in sync, but I mean I can't really explain how many stages it goes through, but
which must complicate it even more if they want to make a change during previews, which means you then have to go back and edit all the dance sequences being filmed if they cut apart music and stuff. So I mean well, fortunately that didn't happen too many times because we knew what we were doing and we knew that we knew the parameters were that it had to stay in sync, and so therefore try and write this piece of music the right amount of bars and all the rest of it. But minor things changed. We'd have to cut things out, or we'd change a bit of choreography. But yeah, it's a bit of a minefield. But we had a way of working that meant we wouldn't go wrong too many times. And how closely did you? I mean, this might sound like a question with a silly answer, but how closely did you work with Rob Howell, the set designer, and Paul Keeve, the illusion designer?
Well, it's the same with most productions. We have to work as closely as we possibly can because we're all interdependent on various aspects of our designing. See, Rob had to come up with this. We had to work with Rob very, very closely because the set design is our canvas, and early on we've got to fit that technology to that set. And for example, I also have a team of people who I work with, and it's kind of a big collaboration because a chap called Alan Cox who works as my production video, and also he consults on all the technology that we use. we had to get in there with Alan, and we had to say, look, how big are these screens going to be? All right, well, we can't quite make them that big because the panels of the LED don't fit that size. So, okay, what about if we make it a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller? You know, there's all these parameters that we've got to start from. So Rob really has got a lot of things to consider.
And of course, you and the lighting designer must have a huge input into what
I mean, it's a huge,
it's
a huge amount of research and development which goes on from the very beginning. I mean, you know, to see a project like goes through probably took, just for my department, is really more than a year. I mean, and then there are workshops before that, and it's a long time frame. It's a lot of commitment. But eventually, you know, we get there. But the problem with video is, it's not really a problem, but it's something we have to consider, is that it has to, if we're going to do something as bold as Ghost, you have to get in there from the from the get-go. You know, you have to be explaining that all the materials you're going to work with, you're going to project onto, they all have to be factored in. Otherwise, it may not look like a successful design. It may look like a mismatch or a clash, or, you know, there is a lot of things that can go wrong.
And you don't have to answer this, but do you pitch what you need to the producers, or do they say, here's what you have to play with, work with the team, or...?
Well, no, what we'd normally do is a treatment which kind of demystifies it to a producer. I mean, I'll normally write a treatment to say, this is going to be, I'd suggest we do it this way. We work with this kind of, well, you know, we'll work with projectors, we'll work with LED, and then it sort of starts from there. I mean, there's so many different things. Then we'll start looking at where we could find the technology we need, because it's not obviously available everywhere. And then the other thing we do is we describe the visual style and how we're going to make the footage, and how we're going to originate all of that footage, because it all has to start somewhere, and all has to be original footage. All has to look a certain way.
You can't go on the internet and download images from
No,
Google
we kind of, I mean, and then what I bring to the table is I bring together, well, I have a big, you know, understanding of all the visual styles, and I'll try and get the, you know, what I really have to do is get inside the head of the director, because, you know, they've got a vision as well, and it's trying to understand what a director wants to achieve, and that's where I can, through talking to them a lot and getting inside their head, is I can begin to figure out, okay, this is what we're going to be trying to do, and this is how it's done.
And then they say, no, that's complete rubbish, go back and do
well, hopefully not. You know, if I've done my job right, you get to a certain day in the theatre. It's the same for lighting design. It's a terrifying milestone. When you get into a theatre, you've put all these screens up, you've done all of this post-production, and you sit down in a darkened room and you switch it all on, and the director sits next to you, and you kind of turn around and you say to them,
well,
is that what you meant? And fortunately, most time we're on the right track. We're talking the same language. I can remember when I did lighting designs, and I've discussed this a lot with a lot of my fellow lighting designer friends, when, you know, it does quite often, you know, you would turn to the director and they'll say, well, actually, no, I didn't imagine it as is this sort of cold feel. Can you make it a lot warmer or something like that? And it's terrifying, because you've designed this palette of colours around, you know, what you thought was needed. But it could be even worse in projection design if in fact they turn around and said, no, that isn't what I want, because you've had to spend the last 6 weeks putting all that stuff together. So then turning it around at a moment's notice is almost impossible. So...
And for Ghost, you've invented something, haven't you? Was it the Orbitron 2000 or the...
Well, it's a little unfair to say that I've completely invented it, but we have got... it's not called that, it's called the Orb-O-Matic.
Orb-O-Matic.
Which is a new kind of projector.
Moving projector, isn't it?
It is. There were moving projectors. I wasn't ever very satisfied with them, so... basically, we just invented our own one, which is a great one, which...
patent pending, or...?
Not at all. Basically, again, my colleague Alan, I said there's a need for this thing, and it kind of amused me that he could put together this bespoke creation, which is it's basically a projector that moves wherever you want it, and we christened it the Orb-O-Matic, and really I only just told you because it makes me laugh, and I quite like lo-fi technology. So.
But it provides a wonderful effect for the story, which
it does.
It proves its purpose.
It does, yeah.
You're listening to Musical Talk.
Sadly, a musical no longer with us is Love Never Dies, which you also very heavily involved. One of the things one remembers from seeing the show is the projections, because it's the first thing you're greeted with when you walk in the theatre, and it starts the show, and almost it's like the old sort of music hall element of tab comes down, scene change behind, let's entertain with more storytelling in a cinematic way. It's almost 3D, isn't it, in Love Never Dies?
Well, I have a real soft spot for that show, and I grieve it very much, the loss of it in the West End, but it was one of those really special shows where it felt a little bit like Our House in a way. It was one of those ones where you just have to jump in the deep end, and and there was some fairly complicated things we had to achieve. I can remember I worked very closely. I should say I very often work with my dear colleague Gemma Carrington, and I remember her face when I presented some of the ideas. Gemma's a National Film School graduate as well, great animator, and I can remember actually seeing her sat opposite me at a table, and some of the looks of horror at what I'd agreed to do. One of which was some horses appearing out of the crests of waves and on the beach of Coney Island. I just one of those things where you just really wanted. I absolutely loved the music, and I fell in love with the Coney Waltz. I just so wanted to do it, and it was a lot of the creative team. There was a lot of old friends. It was Bob Crowley. It was a special time when we did that show, and also it was in black and white, which is something I have a complete. I mean, it's funny talking. It's a tonal range I'm actually much more at home with. I love black and white. I love working in that palette.
Brief Encounter.
I was very at home in, and it was just one of those really special things.
It's almost
to do.
more expressive in a way, because you can. I mean, I'm not an artist, so I don't know the terms, but you can have different sort of saturations of black and white, can't you? So it's almost.
Well, you're dealing with. You're dealing with contrast, which is it's really, really great to work with, and especially with projection, because projection really works well with contrast is what often in theatre makes the images stand out with projection, and so it was just a really great palette to work in, and it just was wonderful. I mean, you're dealing with fairground imagery. All those sort of really rich things, a lot of light bulbs, a lot of just things that work well as projection, and great music. So it was a thrill, really.
And also it adds to the whole Victorian feel. You mentioned magic lanterns and things, and so it's almost like you're going back to the beginning of the early days of projection and almost paying homage.
Absolutely,
to where it all started, probably.
Well, also, if I'm honest with you, what my colleagues and the gang that we have here, we've kind of developed over the last 10 years we've been doing stuff. We all love filmmaking, and we just love anything analog. We just love the past, and we love the future as well. We love technology, but working in a period is always a lot of fun. If you're doing a show like Brief Encounter, it's really nice to evoke a time, to sit in the theatre and to contribute some footage that you might have thought was made during the time of the play. And the other great thing is it's using that modern technology of projection in the theatre to look Victorian, not to look digital. So you see, Ghost it's
modern.
It's modern. Enron was modern as well. It's and this is a total contrast when we're working in a period, and so it's always a lot of fun to do that kind of period stuff as well as the cutting edge, stuff.
We talked about Brief Encounter on the podcast. Tell us about that, because that was another groundbreaking show as regards blending scenery with... I didn't see it, sadly, but a lot of my colleagues on the show have seen it. How was your brief encounter with Brief Encounter?
Well...
Was it a brief encounter to begin with, or was it quite a...
No, it was fairly quick, I think, really. I mean, the thing about Brief Encounter, it was a lovely show. It was a very charming show, and it was caught in a period, so it was really... You almost thought you were... Well, it was a whole experience, because you'd go to the cinema and you'd sit down and the usherates would show you to your seat, and it was a very immersing experience. But I think from our perspective of doing the footage, it was a gift for me, because I have to admit, I do love trains. don't mind admitting. So I got slightly obsessed. I mean,
John's now working on a new production of Starlight Express with real projected trains.
I don't think they'd really want that, but it was, anything like that. I mean, it was the best of all worlds, because I love cinema as well. So, and I love cinemas. I mean, I love the whole spectacle of the cine variety, concept that sadly doesn't exist in this country anymore. So, it was a gift, really, doing that show. But again, sometimes it's the subject matter has a sort of has a visual side to it, which is just great to work with. And trains are really good to project, as are anything to do with cinema. The real fun bit about Brief Encounter was the characters were on the stage in front of your eyes, and then they would walk into the screen, and suddenly there'd be a depiction of them on screen.
Wizard of Oz is another show of yours currently playing at the lovely London Palladium.
Yeah.
What's that like to sort of bring that bang up to date, that theatre?
It's got a very interesting shape to the
16 by 9 stage, we'll call it.
Well, it's worse than that. It's more like 2-to-1, I think. It's really, really cinematic, and it comes as a bit of a surprise, because you don't ever think of a Frank Matcham theatre in that sort of shape. But I guess they, because it was more for variety, it was less the sort of shape of a playhouse, and it was very, very wide. No, it was great times. I mean, we were there over Christmas. I'll tell you a funny story. That
survived the snow.
We survived the snow, but we didn't survive a burglary
dear.
Over Christmas.
Were the ruby slippers stolen?
No, the entire video installation for the show was stolen. Well, what happened was, we were working there. We had a break over Christmas, like 3 days off, and I think we came back on the 28th of December, or something, maybe it was the 27th. Went to hang my coat up on where all our equipment is stored underneath the stage, and noticed that nothing was there anymore. So that was just before the tech started. So
Oh dear.
one of those that's not not your everyday experience in the West End.
Where was it in the end?
Well, they found a fly case halfway. I think it was up at Queensway or somewhere, some miles away. Somebody had wheeled all the equipment out of the theatre up Oxford Street. No one batted an eyelid. Quite a shock to the system. Terrible, really. And then, we somehow over that Christmas break, we got it all back together and started the tech rehearsals just after New Year. But anyway, there you go. But it was great. I mean, the place was, being redeveloped, which,
helped, probably.
Yeah, fantastic. So much more room in front of house there now. It's really great.
I was at, I think, one of the first or second nights of the show.
Yeah, don't tell me it didn't work or something.
It worked, but it seemed to go on for an incredibly long time.
That's right. Very long scene change behind the. Well, it's in two halves. That film. It starts off as the tornado, or the twister, or the cyclone, depending on who you are. But I call it the tornado.
The cyclodo, we'll call it.
Yeah, that would be good. Then we had this thing called the holding pattern, which you can probably imagine is basically, during the previews, it took quite a long time to change it to that Munchkin land set behind. And so we never hoped to really hit that holding pattern when we made the film. But for about the first week, it was there pretty much circling around for the, couple of minutes. But now I'm disappointed that you see less of the film. I mean, you probably still see, I think it's a good 3 minutes, but as soon as the farmhouse hits the outer, the wherever it is. It's in
Kansas.
orbit. No, I think it goes into orbit. It's straight back down again into Munchkinland. So yeah, no, you don't see that part of the film anymore.
The only issue I had with that scene was, doesn't that denote that this is actually happening? Isn't the whole thing of the story is, did it happen, did it not happen? But then come the end of this production, there's a thing where I realised it did really happen.
Yeah.
Sorry for giving it away. But so was that an obvious? Are you hinting at that, or was it just you wanted a nice sort of
Well, we were trying to get as
Stanley
much
Kubrick style?
Well, I think when we were storyboarding it, I remember talking to Jeremy about it a lot. I think we were both of a similar mind, that we tried to make as much sense of it as we could. So, I mean, he knows absolutely every detail about the story, but all I can say is that we did struggle to storyboard it, because there's, I mean, for example, the witch you see in the film, in our film, in the Palladium version of the film, is not the Wicked Witch of the West who you see in the film, the original film. We see the Wicked Witch of the East. This doesn't make sense, because when this farmhouse then subsequently crashes into the ground, it's the Wicked Witch of the East who's underneath it. So why would you see the Wicked Witch of the West on your way to that place? So I think what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of confusion about what happens between Kansas
And whatever this
and
is.
Oz. But we pieced it together as best we could. We do have our own, in our heads, our scheme about what's happening, and also I suppose it's quite a thrill-seeking film. I mean, we're trying to take.
Oh, they should give you sit bags for the first 10 rows of the theatre. I think it's very disorientating.
Again, the brief is it's just trying to keep the audience, keep the story going, because it's an enormous scene change that we have to work with, we have to cover, and they have this drum revolve.
Quite a loud scene change.
Yeah, quite loud. Fortunately, the film affords quite a lot of volume as well, but it's a lot of stuff happening, and at the time, I guess we were trying to keep the screen time. We were trying to make every second of that valid, so that we could keep the audience, going. I mean, fortunately, Andrew Lloyd Webber,
Who?
yeah,
Him. Yeah.
he actually he was great. I mean, he wrote the music after looking at our film. Or at least he adapted it. I mean, I don't know quite what he had to do, but it's very difficult to put film to music, and or at least it would be for us to animate something. And it all came together very, very quickly in January, this year. It's magnificent to hear the music, and see the film at the same time. It's all part of the same thing.
It's refreshing, because as a musician, I don't think the orchestra get enough praise in shows. So it's nice to have a moment in the middle of the show when the orchestra have 3 minutes to really play their hearts out.
Yeah, no, they do, don't they, as well? They really do. I mean, we had some funny things where, we would edit that film in the previews, and sometimes we'd put it back together, and strangely we could never quite figure it out. It might be a couple of bars too short, the film, suddenly, which was terrifying, because you think, well, what's happened, but we managed to, the final version, everything was in sync, and it all works great. I mean, it really does. And they have to the orchestra have to come back. They have a little vamp section where they get the go from backstage from the stage manager, who says, "Yep, good to go. It's all there."
A safety, I believe.
A safety. That's right. And and then that starts this whole descent into Oz, which is the last part of the film. And every night, the bang crash, the wallop as the house goes into the ground or whatever of Oz, it hits it dead on. So it's always lovely to see.
And also, this show features live video, doesn't it? At the end of Act 1. Yeah,
there's a thing called the Wizard Cam, which Chris
Wizardcam.com.
It's a booth under the stage where Michael Crawford goes, and he addresses he addresses
and doesn't Hannah Waddingham go down there as well?
She does in Act 2, doesn't she? Yeah, she delivers a lot of her speeches through this special camera that we have, which ends up on stage being projected in various places.
I never saw Enron, but it was nominated for Best Musical, wasn't it, on Broadway, because it had songs in it.
Oh, it may have been. Yeah, I know Adam was nominated. Yeah.
Music played a very, very big part in it. Tell us, because when I saw Ghost, I thought this is very Enron, even though I didn't see Enron. So obviously Enron is ingrained in my brain somehow.
Sure.
Obviously with the stock exchange and all that kind of stuff. Do you think you're starting to get a style for your work now?
I'd hope not, because we have to change whatever our style is to whatever the project is. But yeah, it's funny. It's come up before, but I mean, I can't think of much that, apart from the stock markets, that is an Enron that's a similarity. But Enron was to Ghost, that is. But Enron was, for a great part of it, all about the stock markets, the thrill of the stock market. But it was very, very simple.
It was a very physical piece as well, wasn't
it? It was. And this is Rupert Gould for Headlong. We did it in Chichester. I don't know, it's just one of those, it was quite a special show. We didn't really know what we had until it premiered in Chichester. It's great doing things at Chichester because it's such a you can kind of cut yourself off, go down to Chichester, concentrate on doing the show. But I wasn't, when we did it, what I'd describe it as an 80s, primarily a sort of late 80s, early 90s feel of a projection design. So there's a lot of sort of TV style footage in it, but the piece itself, it was really just trying to
evoke all 4x3.
All 4x3, lots of little excerpts.
That little blob appears in the top right, which means change the
well, I don't know if they have that in America. I know the thing you hardly ever see it anymore now, but the advert.
No. In cinemas, you have the little blob that appears in the top right, which I think originally meant change the projection.
Oh, change the reel. Oh, that's really old. That's going back to Academy Film Ratio. Yeah, change the reel every 10 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, it was just one of those surprises, really. But there was we worked very. I worked very, very. It was one of those real collaboration, the departments.
We had the amazing Anthony Ward on this.
I did, and we had such a lot of time for each other because he had to produce this set which served a million purposes. It had to be a screen, it had to be transparent, so you could see scenes behind it. There's a lot of collaboration.
And he's having big success with Sweeney Todd at the moment in Chichester.
That's in Chichester too, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Did you see Sunday in the Park with George?
I did, and I saw it in New York as well, which was, I think, one of the best places I could have possibly chosen to see it.
Did you sit there and think, oh crap, why didn't I get this? Because it's obviously that. Because when I saw Forbidden Broadway at the Menier, you probably know where I'm going to go with this. They did. To the tune of Junior's Busting Out All Over, they did Soon Projections Will Take Over.
Yeah.
In the Menier space, parodying the Sunday in the Park with George. How important is that production as regards to the way projection is meeting theatre in your mind? It's
pretty important. I mean, I got to say, I nearly had a go at doing that show, but never worked out. And I couldn't wait to see it. I mean, I really couldn't. I couldn't imagine what they were going to do in the Menier space because it's
widescreen.
Well, it's challenging as well. When you're that close to stuff, it's unforgiving as well. I mean, it's really, really, really difficult to do. But I went to see it in New York, and what I really took from it was syncopation between. It's something to aspire to. Was how well the characters talk, they interacted. I mean, it's just I couldn't fault how the projected material worked with the live stuff on stage.
And I sadly didn't see it, but tell me if I'm wrong. They had elements of the set that were projected, blended in with the physical set.
They did. I mean, Daniel Evans, I saw him do it in America, and he. I'm just going to cut to the chase because the best bit was in Act 2 when his character also had he had an alter ego who was kind of projected, and it was just mesmerisingly well done. It was fantastic. Some of it was scenic, but it was kind of interactive. It was astonishing, really. I mean, that was probably when 2005 or 6, maybe.
Can't remember.
It was doing pretty well. It was good stuff.
Are you able to give us any hints as to what musicals are grabbing you next, or any shows you've seen in the West End that you want to gush about that you haven't provided animation for? I'm
about to go into a bit of a theatre era, so that's not really going to thrill your listeners.
Play era.
Yeah. So well, that's true. That's better. Yeah, play era. But no, we're revisiting Ghost. That's going to take up a lot of the time next year.
For Broadway and beyond, I would guess.
Well, we'll see how Broadway goes, and it's an exciting thing to do it again. Well, I know Matthew's got lots of ideas. Matthew doesn't sit still really with things. He'll keep developing them, so he'll be giving us lots of challenges for that. And there's lots of things, that may or may not happen. But the thing about shows now is they tend to be a long way in the future. So there's a.
Do you almost see yourself? I mean, if you're someone says, I want to do a great big musical with 70% of it projected, it's going to open in 4 years' time.
That's about the right amount of time.
Do you almost become like one of these people who analyse the future of technology, and do you sort of think, well, what will be possible in 4 years' time, and how can we make that happen? Like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs, that they did that a lot. They were sort of future technologists or something. They were able to predict what will be possible in the future.
If something was in 4 years' time, I'm sure there would be some great new technology. But the thing that I know about working in theatre environments and working with the designs that we have to do is that it's not always easy to apply those new technologies to theatre. So I'd probably be looking at what's really state-of-the-art now and thinking we could apply that in 2 or 3 years.
And what is state-of-the-art now?
No, what's happening is that the little LED technologies that we talked about briefly earlier, they are getting much, much more...
cheaper.
Well, they're getting cheaper, and they are getting more reliable. They're getting quieter, which is really important in theatre, which is one of my obligations, is to keep the technology from being noisy, which ruins the experience. And the other thing that's happening is they're getting more detailed, as in the pictures are getting much, much better. They're getting the LEDs much, much smaller, and therefore they're getting the LEDs closer and closer. So you can imagine that you could do some really, really detailed, vibrant, amazing-looking backdrops in, the more attention you pay to these screens and more money you put into them, the better the image quality. So you could really transport your audience to some amazing places and environments.
And I have to play the devil's advocate as my last question. Do you think the art of projection is killing the art of set design? Not
at all. I think they're working hand in hand. I wouldn't like to design anything that wasn't something that was connected to a physical design. Otherwise it'd just be pointless. I mean, we're
just acting in the cinema then, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not really an aesthetic. I think I can enhance a set design, work with it, bring it alive, perhaps.
Set design can enhance projections as well, so you're
absolutely. I mean, we are absolutely, and working with my fellow designers is the whole. Just is the system. We work together on materials, and I mean, because projection, it's all very exciting LED, but projection is actually what works really great, and is the art that's come from, centuries ago. That only really works well when you've got the right conditions. You've got a great sort of screen material. Maybe you've found something that reflects the light really well. It only really works when you put a lot of work into exhibiting the footage or integrating it with the set design. You know, if you're going to project on the walls of a set, what's the paint finish, what's the texture? It's all that kind of stuff that brings it together. And you don't really want it to be at odds with the set design. You want it to just feel like the same brush. So it's all very interlinked.
Thank you very much, Jon, for chatting to us about a hugely interesting direction that theatre's headed in the past, 100 million years, as you said yourself, and we look forward to seeing your work and everyone else's work in this field.
Great, thank you, Nick.
The very lovely and very talented Jon Driscoll there. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. Please do visit www.musicaltalk.co.uk for more information about Jon and every single episode we've done. We've got some great episodes coming up for you, leading us into 2012, which will be a huge year for London because of the Olympics, and it'll be very interesting to see how the Olympics affect the theatres. We're hearing that they may even close for the period of the Olympics. We are on Twitter, of course, at twitter.com/musicaltalk, or Facebook at facebook.com/musicaltalk. Hit us up there. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much for listening. I'm out of here, and I'll leave you with a clip of I'm Out of Here from Ghost the Musical. We'll see you next week. Bye.
It's not Cuba. I love when that party. Rest in peace, 'cause life is started. Going in my reservation, 'cause I'll take a long vacation. Look at me, I'm walking through it and talking to me.
This episode of Musical Talk